This episode of Beer and Bullshit is brought to you by Woodhouse Brewing. Woodhouse's lineup of beers is brewed to perfection and best enjoyed in the company of close friends and family. Check them out today at the LCBO or visit them at the Toronto Brew Pub with a newly opened patio. Hello, folks. Welcome to episode 3 of the Beer and Bullshit podcast, coming to you this week from the sunny shores of Lake Huron. Yes, I'm on a family vacation, enjoying the sun, enjoying the lake, enjoying not being connected to everything all the time forever. Currently hiding in a bunkie, taking brief respite from a cold drink and the sunshine, because I am that devoted to you, dear listeners. Got an interesting show for you this week, a good interview with Shehan De Silva. But before we get to that, I just wanted to do some follow up from my first show, my interview with Greg Taylor of Steam Whistle. You may recall Greg mentioned that he wanted to get the company back to its roots, back to doing one thing really well. And he mentioned that he wasn't exactly pleased with the way new brands had been rolled out since he left the company. Since Greg and I chatted, a listener of the show has emailed to inform me that the Von Bugle Brewing branding has been taken down from Steam Whistle's Evans Avenue production facility. There was ostensibly a Von Bugle tasting room and beer store at the Evans Avenue space, and it's gone. So I reached out to Greg to ask what was up, if he had killed the Von Bugle brand, and he let me know that the Evans Avenue tap room has been converted into a beautiful lunchroom and beer after work space for their hardworking staff. He said, I quote, "As I mentioned, I'm focused on the staff, doing my best to ensure their days are enjoyable at work, while providing them with a clear vision that we aspire to be known as the brewer of Canada's most respected premium beer, Steam Whistle Pilsner," end quote. So people who work at the Steam Whistle Evans production facility basically have the most badass break room in Canada beer right now. Rest in peace, Von Bugle. Maybe soon, not sure, but definitely rest in peace, Von Bugle Tap Room. But on to this week's show. This week, I talked to Shehan De Silva, the owner of Lost Craft Brewing Company, and we talk a lot about what it means to be a contract brewer. For those of you who don't know, contract brewing ostensibly means someone who pays to have their beer brewed at another facility, i.e., one they don't own. Now, contract brewing isn't an uncommon occurrence in the brewing world. However, in Ontario, it enjoys perhaps a rather uncommon disdain. We tend to speak about contract brewers pejoratively in Ontario. Brewers are resentful of contract brewers because they don't have enough skin in the game. A lot of people who built breweries built them themselves. They've learned how to brew beer. They went through the process of having to find space, develop a brewery, build a brewery. And so when a contract brewer comes along and ostensibly pays someone else to do the work for them, quote unquote, real brewers tend to take issue with it. Now, fair enough. And early on in my beer writing career, I was definitely of the same mind. But early on in my beer writing career, maybe 2011, 2012, seemed to be a time when there was an influx of contract brewers. It felt like, certainly in Toronto, that craft brewing was a thing that was taking off. And, realistically or not, it seemed like a lot of people thought it was a way to make some money. And so in came people who were basically marketers who thought that they could create a beer company, develop a nice label, pay someone to make some beer for them, either at Black Oak or at Cool Brewing in Etobicoke, get a delivery van, and start setting up accounts. So, in that sense, there was a sort of negative connotation that people maybe weren't in it for the right reasons, whatever the hell that means. So, since then, contract brewers have sort of all been painted with a rather broad brush, that they've all been this sort of um, opportunistic marketing kind of vibe. The truth of the matter is that contract brewing is a regular occurrence, and lots of brewers who you would consider legit and who have lots of indie cred started out contract brewing or are in fact contract brewing their large volume beers at other spaces right now. And then at the same time, here's Shehan De Silva and Lost Craft Brewing Company. Shehan's not a brewer, and he'll readily admit it, but he's got a beer that sells more beer than most other craft brewers in the province. I don't mean the big, the big ones like Steam Whistle or Bose, but I mean there's a lot of craft brewers that wish they sold as much beer as Shehan De Silva. And so while he may not be a quote unquote brewer, he is running a successful brewing company and he's doing it quite well. And frankly, the beers are pretty good. Some of them are award winning, in fact. So I think maybe it's time we rethink the conversation about contract brewing in Ontario. And I couldn't think of anyone else better to help start that conversation than Shehan De Silva. He's got a lot to say on the matter. I think you'll enjoy my talk. Will it change your mind about contract beer? I don't know. Did you have an opinion about contract beer before this? I don't think most people even do. So maybe this will be eye opening for you for different reasons. But here's me and Shehan. I was trying to remember the last time we talked. It was 2017. I wrote a piece for the Globe and Mail about contract brewing, and it was kind of like you versus bricks and mortar guys. That was kind of how it was framed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how much do you think the industry's changed since then? Like there's such a like dichotomy. I don't know if you think it's still around or not.
Oh, I think it's worse. Yeah.
Is it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, obviously we've kind of chatted and I have, a certain perspective, but that perspective is kind of colored also in the fact that, I intend in some way, shape or form, whether that's via brew pub or, something larger, to have a physical space, but not because anyone's telling me that's what makes me authentic.
Right.
It's because it makes sense for our business to do that. It's doing that in a logical way is kind of, the name of the game. And, I think that the proof is frankly just in the industry bodies, the OCB, for example, kind of booting out all the contract brewers, making it extremely difficult to operate in a very backwards way, in the sense that, a lot of the OCB, a lot of the OCB members contract brew for people, yet they don't want those people to get the marketing benefits of being within the OCB or using the LCBO programming, et cetera, et cetera. It's just very disingenuous the way that, this industry association, the industry association in Ontario that my experience has been, because it really hasn't been, it's been an odd situation where, the entire focus, and this is frankly why I think the industry is in the situation that it's in. Like, the entire focus has been blaming people, like blaming the government or blaming competitors or blaming different ways of doing business as a reason why your sales aren't as high as they should be, or as high as you want them to be. And and then it's just been it's been a situation where they've just been focused on the wrong thing. Like, you see what's happened in RTDs, you see what's happened in craft spirits, you've seen the move towards lower alcohol products. It's just across the board, if the market has changed, and the focus of a great number of people within kind of the industry bodies in Ontario have really been targeting us, Ace Hill, formerly Woodhouse, people like that. But the reality is that that's not, we were never the problem.
Well, how do you feel? I mean, I get it that you don't have representation at like literally the one board that has a seat at the table with government. But I mean, I'm interested to hear how you'd feel targeted. I mean, aside from the snarky asides, like, oh, they're contract brewers and we all take our shots at Ace Hill. But I mean, how do you feel that you've been targeted, or do you have any insight into why they took away contract brewers' rights to be at the table?
Why we were, I mean, my personal opinion, I mean, you can, I think you could get, better insight from people that people that are within the OCB board. Because, to be clear, the decision was made not as through a general vote. The decision was made by the board of the OCB. The board of the OCB is run by, controlled by, like, big guys being Bose, Steam Whistle, Amsterdam, Muskoka. And then it ranks like by volumes. And then there's all these other guys, left fields in there. I don't recall all of them. But that board took the vote, and it didn't flow through to the industry, to the kind of the general, to the general membership. So I would just say, as a general point, that's the simplest answer, is that, contract brewers, and I wouldn't say specifically me, I think it's a general statement about contract, brewing, that within the industry association, there's been, and I'm sure you've seen, like, whatever you call it. I think there's like some sort of stamp that they created, like the
the independent brewery
brewed,
stamp
yeah,
for like
whatever
one
it
of their
is.
labeling.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like the whole vibe has been really just like, we're better than you for whatever, for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
When this kind of actually came up even before they made the announcement about probably about roughly speaking about 2 years, when I think it was maybe the last OCD conference, and there was a general meeting, and I stood up, and I was effectively the only at the time. I mean, before we technically left, we were the largest contract brewer by volume.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to explain away how, because at the time, before they made some changes recently, you basically paid your dues based off how big your brewery was. So
Right.
it was a volume related thing. So, but the odd thing that was happening was, what they basically said is yeah, you pay the same as everyone else, but we're stripping away all of these benefits. You
Mm-hmm.
can't vote, you can't benefit in all these different programming and et cetera. So I'm like, this is, and obviously that's unfair and dumb. So I said, okay. I mean, then the discussion was becoming, should we pay the same dues and whatever had it. But the reality was, they just didn't want that, like the contract brewing segment, within the OCB framework at all. And that's effectively what ended up happening. And I spoke to, someone, I think it was, I don't recall who it was, but someone sat up. I said, well, how is this fair? And the argument that was made by one of the, I think the owners or one of the representatives from one of the breweries was, you guys are marketing companies. We don't have money to sell effectively to market our beer. And that's why we deserve these marketing benefits and you don't. And I'm just like, it's a ridiculous argument to say we have more, like we make less money on our beer than you do.
It's always been interesting to me, and I'm guilty of it too, because I feel like 2011, 12, 13, there was like a scourge of contract brewers that were largely using the same person to make their beer. And I think that's kind of what soured people on the concept of, contract brewers. But now so many different people have come to the table through contract brewing, and all their stories and backgrounds are a little different. So it's interesting to paint everyone with the same brush. Like, I look at Mark and Mandy Murphy of Left Field Brewery. They started with contract brewing. Sawdust City started contract brewing. I mean, there's examples like Hogtown. That was literally like 9 finance guys who just thought it'd be fun to have a brewing company on the side. So there's a different story that gets people to contract brewing. But I mean, it's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you in one of my earlier shows, is because like you kill it, right? You sell a lot of beer. So like there's got to be a point where people say, okay, contract brewing is a legit thing, and there needs to be maybe some representation, and we need to have these guys at the table to have a conversation. So maybe, I feel like we jumped right into it, but there's probably people that will listen to this that don't know your story. So maybe we should go back to you getting into it. You were a Bay Street guy and basically said, I want to try something different. That's the vibe, right?
Yep. Essentially, I mean, I traveled a lot in Europe, loved like European style beers. This is going back to 2011, where at the time, the majority of beers, not all of them obviously, but the majority were within the craft segment, were really like the hoppier IPAs, like that style of beer. And just wasn't my like forte. Like I loved the whole idea of craft and brewed locally and no preservatives, et cetera, but I just didn't like a lot of those beer styles. And I was just super passionate about it. And I had some relationships through some friends and through my network with some very large established breweries, but they're, German craft breweries are massive breweries.
Right.
So smaller guys, like not the hugest ones, but I had an opportunity to go out there, visit them, learn a bit about it. I'm not a brewer by any stretch, but just got a feel as to, some of the styles that they brew, specifically like Helles, like the Kolsch, the stuff that we do kind of more frequently now.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of came back. There's a lot of work between then, in terms of planning and meeting with the LCBO and talking about what we were kind of coming to do and what we were trying to do. I think conceptually for me, it was always love beer, want to do something entrepreneurial, and wanted to make approachable beers to get more people into the segment. Mm-hmm. And then conversely, dovetailing in, being a person of color, being a visible minority. Another thing that I always felt was, I felt like a lot of the beer marketing, just generally, not necessarily just even within craft, but just generally didn't really speak to a big segment of the population. And being from, I grew up in Scarborough, being, born and raised in Toronto, went to school here, it just seemed very odd to me that it seemed like there was just a big number of people that were just excluded out of the space. And one of our, objectives and goals has always been to just try to attract a wider audience into the segment.
Folks, are you like me? Do you like supporting independent breweries? Yeah, you do. What better independent brewery to support right now than the Indie Ale House? Indie is right in the name, so you know they're independent. They're located in Toronto. Their brew pub is in the Junction, and they have a brewery in Italy in the Manulife Center as well. Of course, these are weird times for going out. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe you don't even live in Toronto. That's okay. You can still try the delicious beers that they're making at the Indie Ale House because they made it easy. Beer to your door, ordered from the comfort and safety of your own home. That's my favorite way to order things. You got free delivery anywhere in Toronto if you order 12 beers or more, and a flat rate anywhere else in Ontario. Why not order a Stay Home Pale Ale? $1 from every can of Stay Home purchased will be donated to the fund that supports their employees that have been temporarily laid off due to COVID-19. Check them out at indiealehouse.com. There's a few things you said there that I feel like you're so ahead of the curve. Like when you talk about, number one, I remember this when you started, you were like, I'm going to focus on the LCBO space. Most breweries started, they're like, we're going to make beer, we're going to have a little space, we're going to have some fun and do some licensee sales. And then LCBO was always like an afterthought, and they weren't usually very good at it. And you were like day one LCBO. And that's where I think you had most of your success, right? Retail sales in the LCBO. Mm-hmm. The second thing that strikes me now, as you said, is that like, we are going back so hard to those like Hellas beers, like Kolsch. Like this is the time where we're getting back to balanced basic beers. You came out in a time, like you said, 2011, 2012, everyone was doing like face melting, high IBUs, like big hoppy beers. It's almost like you were ahead of the curve. And then the final thing you said, like, it's interesting how like I didn't hear anyone talking about diversifying the craft beer industry and, maybe the last 5 years. Like, so you've kind of been ahead of the curve on a lot. So I'm wondering if like, do you feel that the beer industry has like caught up, started to show you a little love at all? Or is it just intensified the divisions?
For whatever reason, I think when people get to know me and get to know our story and how we're different and why we're different, I think that people come around. I mean, I've definitely spoken to a lot of the well-respected beer writers and people that are kind of in the space bloggers. And when they, after they talk to me, after they hear a little bit about it, they take the lens of contract beer away and they just kind of try our beers for what they are. Generally speaking, I get a pretty, positive response. I came at this from, a background that wasn't traditional beer. And, one of the things that I definitely received at the outset was a lot of people questioning like my commitment to beer, or because I don't look like a brewer, right? A lot of people saying, why are you, like, you're not the brewer, like you don't actually make the beer, right? And then just like that mentality is pervasive, right? And then when you start seeing it, it does get you discouraged, but it's pretty, motivated to try to, be persistent and make things work. And I'm glad we are where we are. My thing has always just been making sure that people are authentic in what they do. And that's kind of effectively how I've been since we started the company. So I hope that, as more and more people learn a bit more about our story, they kind of can see that as well.
Yeah. And I think craft beer is a lot about the story, right? Like some of them, it got cliche. Like I mentioned this actually on my first podcast episode with Greg Taylor of Steam Whistle. Like they were the first guys to be like, oh, we're sitting around a campfire and decided to start a brewing company. And now there's been like a million of those. But like it's always been that story that's pulled people in. Like, oh, we built in an old church. So maybe it's the difficulty of hearing like your story, because it's not, that like fairy tale that we're used to having woven into craft beer. So I don't know if that's an element of it or not, but I get what you're saying there. Like I feel like you've had a pretty tough go, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, and I always struggle with the logic of, when you take a step back from beer, and I think you can approach it from any industry. If I said, I have no experience, like I've never worked for a brewery before, never made a beer, never made a brand. I had never made, like I worked at, I went to U of T and I just worked in finance, from when I graduated. If if I went to anyone and said, listen, give me like a couple $1 million to build a brewery, you'd have to be insane to say that that was a good idea.
Right.
So, like it's for me, I don't understand why it's celebrated to make stupid decisions. And I think for someone to
That's craft beer in a nutshell.
no, but like that's and don't get me wrong, it's cool if you can make that work and like you bootstrap it and risk everything and you come out of it ahead. But I think you're starting to see like with breweries for sale more and more and there's little cracks kind of emerging. It's not fun to be in a bad situation. And
yeah, but I think a lot of that is mythology. Like if you look at the actual people that are starting craft breweries, I mean, they're like you said, they're predominantly white people. They're usually on a second or third career. It's not like they're like, I'm going to start this from nothing. It's like, oh, I decided to quit my job because you had banked a lot of money. You could like, it's not like you're like, I'm just going to go start a brewery. That is part of the mythology too, right? I think there's an interesting thing to be said too about like, you're good at the stuff that the craft brewers aren't, and I'm probably going to take shit for saying that, but like I think a lot of craft breweries suck at building a brand. They're not good at communications. I don't know if there's like some resentment there, but like I look at your cans, they're good looking cans. Hell, I like the Ace Hill cans too, right? Like they're well branded, and you've built a good brand. You've always had a good web presence. You've always had good branding and social media. So it's almost like you've been good at the things that they're not. So I don't know if there's a resentment there or you're just, I don't know, man. You're kind of a unique cat.
Well, the interesting thing too is like, and this is kind of effectively what happened. And one of the reasons why, I felt like validated, but then I realized quickly, like the validation didn't mean anything. So I think it was our second year, when we won Best in Show at the Ontario Brewing Awards, right? And we won for the Revival, like our Lagerdale, which I think most people didn't expect could win like the best of the best because it's such a basic kind of simple beer. Mm-hmm. And this is coming on the back of being rejected at every like major beer bar in the city with the beer, right? Because Lost Craft, contract brew, painted with a certain brush, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, the beer isn't good. I mean, that effectively, at no point did anyone say, this beer is that I just don't like it because if it's contract brand, like, there are far superior Lagerdales on the market. Fast forward like a month later, we win Best in Show with the same beer. So this is where I started to realize like, there's a bias that exists. There's a club that we're not a part of, and we've accepted that we're not a part of that club. But I think that the bigger opportunity is not convincing, people that are set in their ways that our beer is good. It's just really, frankly, just getting in front of more and more people to make more and more people like craft beer. Because I think that's where I keep saying this. It's like that's where everyone wins. It's not trying to convince someone that's dead set on doing things a certain way that there's another way to skin a cat kind of thing.
Yeah, and one thing I've realized is that if you can get your beer into someone's hand, they typically don't really give a shit if you own the building it was made in, right? I mean, that's such a thing that we've crafted as craft beer nerds. Like, well, he doesn't have any skin in the game because he doesn't own a brewery. Did a dog just get attacked in your house? What's happening?
Sorry, okay? it's my Doberman. He's feeling a little bit anxious. He's getting neutered in 2 days. So
oh, he knows it's coming.
Yeah, I think he knows it's coming. Yeah.
Poor bastard. Well, I'll raise his beer to him. Oh, yeah. To your dog's nuts. Sorry. Cheers.
Exactly.
But anyway, I do think that like it is a construct. Like maybe you go to the beer bars and you're talking to like bar owners and bartenders. But I think if you talk to like people who just want to have a cold beer, I mean, I don't know what percentage of the market still just wants a nice lager, but it's pretty high even in these more aware consumer times. So yeah, I think that once you've got your beer in someone's hand, you probably have just as much a shot as anyone else with them sticking around, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's interesting how you have that issue with beer where it really doesn't exist for tons of other I'd say 99% of industries. Like lots of people have Samsung phones and iPhones and whatever, and every single component within that phone wasn't built by those companies.
Where do you brew your beer now? You're at Equals?
We brew at Brunswick, and we also Brunswick is our primary, but we also do definitely do some work with Equals as well.
Okay. And you've got, I'm actually looking at your website, you've got a handful of brands now. Like you started with one, right?
Yep. Started with one, now too many, but
Too many.
yeah,
Oh, and I
but
can buy chips on your website too.
yep. Exactly, and tequila.
Nice.
Yeah, no, it's just, obviously we've been busy with innovation. I mean, I think that that's the coolest thing about craft beer is really um, making cool, unique, interesting products, and then getting them, getting more and more people trying those products. So that's something that we've definitely been focused on within the beer space, is really making sure that we have a strong innovation pipeline. We had two seasonals. We did our first sour this year, and then like another session IPA. We have a brut IPA coming, imminently, which is one of the few that are going to be, rolling into the LCBO. In addition to some other really cool initiatives with our diversity lager, which we're working on a pretty cool partnership with a not-for-profit that we're relaunching in the coming months. So we
Nice.
definitely want to keep the rotation going, the rotation moving, and keep everything fresh within the lineup.
So what does that process look like? You're talking about developing new brands and trying new things. I mean, the story within a craft brewery would be that, a brewmaster got to try something new. I think a lot of the time it's probably marketing says we need to fill this hole and they work backwards, but that's not the story on the can. But I mean, what does that look like for you? I mean, who's leading? Like you decided you wanted to do an American Pale Ale. Is that your decision? Like
Yeah.
how does that work?
We talk to the team. We see what we like. I mean, to a fault, I'd say we actually don't do it that way, where we look at sales by SKU at the LCBO and try to like fit a niche. I think it's more, for me anyway. It's more when I like a style. A great example would be the sour. So I like I'm traditionally like a lager drinker, and I felt like making something more citrusy, a little bit easier to drink, a little bit less tart and quite refreshing. I
Mhm.
just thought that would be a good style that would fit, the what I call the lost craft customer, someone that's kind of entering a gateway style of beer into that space versus going straight to something, super hoppy or something that's a little bit less approachable.
I still feel like you come at it from a marketing lens because you just mentioned, essentially you've identified the persona of your consumer. And I could talk to 15 more brewers and they wouldn't mention the persona of the person that typically drinks their beer. Like, oh, it was a good beer. I liked it. We had this hop available and we made it. But I don't think that's a discredit for you. I think that's that's part of the beauty of Lost Craft. Like frankly, I respect your hustle because you came at it before you even had a beer. You were talking to LCBO folks, and I think that's what got you on shelves, and that's what got beer moving for you, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think understanding your consumers, is extremely important for sure.
So you've mentioned potential brew pub, you've mentioned retail space. I mean, retail space is like hope and cross your fingers that things stay this way post COVID for brewers. But I mean, what would your ideal lost craft scenario be for a space people can walk in and buy your beer off the street?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely somewhere in Toronto. We're not. I think we're not super location specific, but we have a couple of kind of ideas of opportunities. And our thing is also we've going in the last 2 years, we've been figuring out ways to expand into distilling as well. Like I think that that's actually like a huge thing that we would ideally like to do, and effectively be a one-stop shop where you could have a brewery, on-site distilling, event space. I mean, the whole 9 yards. I mean, that would be the dream. Whether you can, based on like fire codes and stuff that I've realized over time in looking at different spaces, that's not an easy thing, and there's a reason why it doesn't exist. We signed a lease on not steam whistles, Mill Street's old brewery in Scarborough,
Yeah, I
massive,
remember you told me that.
yeah, massive place. And then they took a storage company over ours, which is fine. But like essentially, we've been very, very close. We did another thing, with a couple other spaces, and been super close, and just haven't worked for for various reasons. So, but I'm cautiously optimistic that, within the next year or so, we'll have something kind of more concrete for everyone.
And you're still pushing beer, right? I mean, this is the kind of time when people, I mean, during COVID and now more than ever, people are into lagers and familiar beers. So, have you seen that reflected in your sales numbers?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, lagers are. by far and away probably like 80%, 70 to 80% of our total kind of volume. That being said, it's skewed a little bit when we have, obviously when licensees are there, we have a lot of, IPAs and our ambers and other kind of other products as well. But for sure, for us, I mean, for our brand specifically, for the most part, 3 of our lagers, which are Unify, our light lager, Revival, and Diversity, all 3 of those beers account for the lion's share of.
So you have a beer called Diversity, which is obviously interesting in and of itself, but it's probably worth mentioning that, like, if I had 100 conversations with, craft beer folks, I'd probably see 5 brown or black faces, and here you are, a owner of a brewing company, a visible minority. How much do you think that's shaped the way your business has been run and the way, consumers in the industry has reacted to your company?
To be honest, I don't think many people even know. but not that, I'm generally speaking not particularly politically correct in a lot of ways, in the sense that I don't want people, buying our beer because of that.
Right.
I think, you buy our beer because you like the beer. But I do think it's obviously like shaped a lot of how we've gone about doing our business and the organizations that we've worked with. And, that beer specifically, and it's very odd because, that beer has become our like top selling beer online overnight, which is hard to do with Revival, because that beer sells, so well. I mean, I'm talking about in our online store.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, we launched that beer last year, and it wasn't, I always, one thing that I was, pretty vocal about is authenticity when it comes to diversity and actually meaning something. Because I think, more recently it's become just in fashion to say that you care.
Right.
And I'm not saying that everyone in any way like feels that way or is disingenuous, but that beer we developed, what we did was within the can design itself, we used the top 14 languages spoken in Toronto, and actually designed, like the can is based off kind of silhouette, tower that really represented our city. That came about last year. That was launched effectively in around April, May last year. Because we have like other beers that are more get a lot more buzz. That kind of flew a little bit under the radar, and then this year just seemed to have exploded, which is great. But
why do you think that is?
I think, I mean, obviously, I do definitely feel like a move towards lagers is where it's coming back to. It just feels that way. Like even before, where I was seeing a lot more of the APAs, the reds, the IPAs, even to some extent that we do, which is definitely not the lion's share of what we do. But we definitely just started seeing a resurgence, and I think when people, I mean, when we see it on Instagram all the time, when people see that can, they realize like how interesting it is and unique, and we've gotten a lot of compliments, from it, which has been great. But I think it's very, I think it'd be hard to get more Toronto than that.
Yeah.
In terms of, what kind of is, what our city's about. So yeah, I mean,
I think that's an interesting thing. I think you've tapped something, because Toronto is super diverse, and I wouldn't say that its brewing industry is, right? I mean, Toronto is mostly visible minorities. I think it's 55% of Torontonians are visible minorities at this point, and I don't think that's reflected in the brewing. It's definitely not reflected in who works in the brewing industry. I don't know if people are tapping into that with the can because you've got multiple languages on it, or I don't know. I think more people are becoming aware of what a Hellas lager is too. That probably helps.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out to Muddy York. I think
yeah, that's right. That's a good one. But I've always noticed that even in your branding, you've, I don't know if it's intentional. I think it is, but you'll see black hands holding a beer. You don't see that in a lot of advertising, maybe more and more. But I mean, I feel like you've made an effort to be a little bit more multicultural, given the city that you're attempting to do business in. I'm assuming that's a conscious decision.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just, I think that's where this year I kind of started, not getting my back up, it would be the way that I'd put it, but I feel like for sure, I mean, don't get me wrong, we have people from everywhere. Like, it's not just people of color necessarily, but
no, you're not trying to target them. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just that, but yeah, no, I mean, I think that, for, in an environment today, I think that, beer is definitely like a very socially, I feel craft beer specifically more so than, anything else, pretty socially conscious and pretty, and demand a lot from brewers, like, the whole issue with this OCB and the MP for MPP or whatever it was, like a little while ago. Like, I think consumers really care.
Oh, that
And,
was crazy. I was actually shocked. I mean, I know we are like a feisty bunch of like craft beer nerds, but the fact that they simply posed, I don't know. That was an eye opener for me because I'm of two opinions of this because I think it's a little naive to not assume that craft breweries or business owners will work with the people in government. So I knew it was out there. And I was like, this isn't going to go well because they posed for a picture with I forget his name, that little weaselly guy who's been like
yeah.
anti-choice and yeah. But the swiftness with which everyone was just like on that picture was pretty shocking to me. I don't know, and I'm like usually one of the ones with the lighting my torch first and grabbing my pitchfork, but I was like, wow, we're on this shit.
Yeah, I mean, it was eye-opening for me too. I mean, obviously we weren't a member of the OCB, nor were we in this picture. I knew who this person was though, and I would definitely say that you would this goes back, how you mentioned knowing your consumer. This
Yeah,
is where I always say this, like, there's a disconnect between the people running these companies and the people buying the products, right?
totally,
And
totally.
when you don't understand that, that's where this issue kind of can
Well, and even
can
between the
arise.
owners and maybe the people running your social media and your sales
Yeah,
teams, right? Like you're like, oh, like I'm sure there were some people that were like on Twitter that were like doing social media for these companies. Are like, oh fuck, and the owners are just like, hey, we're with an MPP.
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, and that was where even it turned into even just the whole thing about, with the black check, or the black post or whatever it was, a little while ago.
Yeah, yeah,
And then it turned into other breweries getting like really shamed for not posting, and then it becoming this huge thing. My thing is, like, don't be pissed, like, don't be upset that a brewery doesn't post a symbolic post. Be upset if there's no people of color in any of their marketing. Be upset about, not no outreach to any of these other organizations, if you want to be upset about that. And that's my opinion, is that you should kind of look, just ask for more from those breweries, and don't just worry about one day. I think you should be really, like, everyone, I think, if that's something that they care about, focus on and there are breweries that definitely do it, that make a conscious effort to try to expand the pie. If all you care about is the absolute most unique IPA on earth, and you don't care about anything about what the brewery does and how they, like, who they are, why they make it, what they're trying to do, et cetera, that's fine. That you have every right to do that. But if if you really care about, the social, fabric, or the morals, or what these people stand for outside of that, it's not a
hmm
one day thing. It's an everyday thing.
yeah. It's definitely. I mean, this is the conversation is obviously moving forward a lot faster now, and it's really got people thinking about it. But yeah, there's a lot of lip service happening, and a lot of people are like, okay, yeah, you did, Blackout Tuesday. What else are you gonna do? So it's been
Yeah.
interesting to see.
I look at it as a positive. I think that it kind of highlighted something, and I think that more and more breweries are taking an honest look at their staffing, their marketing strategies, how to bring more people into into the environment. And I think that that's what everyone really benefits from. It's
hmm
like, it's not just us doing it. Like, if we're the only ones doing it, I can guarantee you our voice and our reach and it's not good enough. It's when the OCB makes that as part of their kind of
Mandate.
principles or operating, mandate, whatever it is, right? It's like, and I've always been very confused about that. Is like, I feel like any industry body should be focused on growing the industry. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Grow the industry.
It's just like
And
all this sexist bullshit. It's like, why are you actively forget that you're an asshole? Why are you eliminating half of the market? Like, look at it from an economic point of view. Like, why would you like? I don't know. Why would isolate 51% of potential craft beer drinkers just because you want to make a boob joke on your can? It's just stupid. Well, thanks for chatting, man. It's been good talking to you.
yeah, no, for sure, anytime.
I look
Well,
forward to your potential brew pub on the other side of COVID.
yeah, exactly. And hopefully everyone stays safe, and you as well. And
Well, I
Yeah.
feel like you've got other priorities right now, man.
Yeah. Baby and dog neutering. Yeah, those are definitely the priorities right now.
You're painting a nursery and chopping your dog's balls off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Best of luck.
All
We'll
right.
talk soon.
All right. Thanks. Talk soon. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Be sure and wash your hands.